On July 14, 2023, Burkina Faso's food reserves had only 60 days left. On that same day, in a meeting in Paris, French diplomats and corporate executives raised their glasses. In 2 months, Traore will fall, and the resources will be ours again. Their plan was perfect. They had only failed to account for one thing. Ibrahim Traoré's grandmother had always taught him that the darkest hour comes just before dawn. Ibrahim Traoré stood in the conference room of the presidential palace, silently examining the reports before him. The air in the room was heavy. Agriculture Minister Kabore, Interior Minister Ouedraogo, and Economy Minister Diouf watched their president with concerned expressions. To summarize the situation, Traoré finally said, lifting his eyes from the report, "Our granaries are emptying. 4 major irrigation systems have failed in the last 3 months, and our agricultural production has decreased by 60%. According to these projections, we have approximately 60 days before we face a severe food shortage." "And the international aid we requested?" asked Diouf. "Delayed," replied Traoré, sliding a diplomatic cable across the table. "The World Food Programme suddenly faces logistical challenges. The IMF is reviewing our application. The European Union needs additional assessments." Minister Ouedraogo leaned forward. "Sir, this is not a coincidence. The timing is too perfect. Just when we nationalized the gold mines and asked the French military base to leave." Traoré nodded slowly. "I had the same thought. Abeni, show them what you found." Abeni Konate, the young director of Burkina Faso's newly formed intelligence agency, activated the screen on the wall. Images appeared showing satellite photos, intercepted emails, and bank transfers. "For the past 4 months, there has been a coordinated effort to create an artificial food crisis in Burkina Faso," she explained, her voice calm but tense. "Foreign companies bought up grain reserves through shell companies. 3 major irrigation system failures were not accidents. We found evidence of sabotage. Weather modification technology has been deployed from neighboring countries still under neo-colonial influence." "The goal is clear," she continued, showing a slide with a detailed timeline. "Create hunger, create unrest, create instability, then offer aid with strings attached, primarily the return of mining concessions and military bases." The room fell silent as the ministers absorbed this information. Traoré stood and walked to the window, looking out at Ouagadougou stretching before him. "They think hunger will force us to surrender what we've fought so hard to reclaim," he said quietly. "They believe our sovereignty has a price, and that price is food." He turned back to face his cabinet. "They're wrong. My grandmother lived through the Great Drought of 1973. She always told me that the darkest hour comes just before dawn. We will not only survive this attack, we will use it to achieve true food independence." The next morning, Ibrahim Traoré made an unprecedented move. Instead of hiding the crisis, he addressed the nation directly through radio and television. "My fellow Burkinabe," he began, his voice steady and determined. "I come to you today with difficult news and a call to action. Our nation faces a deliberate attack on our food security. Foreign powers, unhappy with our steps toward true independence, are attempting to starve us into submission." He laid out the evidence of sabotage and manipulation, then continued, "They believe hunger will force us to surrender our resources and sovereignty. They do not know the strength and resilience of the Burkinabe people." Traoré then unveiled what would come to be known as the Green Defense Plan. "Starting today, every available piece of land in our cities and villages will become a garden. Every government building, including this presidential palace, will convert its ornamental grounds to food production. The military will shift focus from traditional defense to agricultural support, helping communities set up sustainable farming systems." He held up a small packet. "These are seeds of our native crops: millet, sorghum, cowpeas, and bambara groundnuts. Crops that survived in our lands long before colonial powers arrived. Crops that can grow with little water and resist pests naturally. Every family will receive these, along with training from our agricultural experts." The speech was met with mixed reactions. International media portrayed it as the desperate move of a failing regime. Western diplomats in Ouagadougou exchanged knowing glances. Traoré's plan seemed naive and inadequate against the scale of the engineered crisis. In Paris, at the headquarters of Groupe Son, one of France's largest agricultural corporations, CEO Pierre Levine watched the speech with amusement. "He's distributing seeds?" Levine laughed, turning to the gathered executives and government officials. "Our weather modification technology will ensure those seeds never sprout. By September, people will be in the streets demanding his resignation." French Foreign Minister Mathieu Dubois nodded. "And then our friend General Traoré will step in to restore order. The mining concessions will be restored, our military base reinstated, and the natural order of things resumed." Back in Burkina Faso, as night fell, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his office, the weight of his nation's future heavy on his shoulders. He opened his drawer and took out an old, worn notebook, his grandmother's farming journal, filled with traditional knowledge about growing food in the harshest conditions. "Guide me, Nana," he whispered, beginning to read by lamplight. 3 weeks into the Green Defense Initiative, results were mixed. In some areas, community gardens were flourishing. In others, crops failed to grow despite all efforts. The sabotage continued. Water sources mysteriously contaminated, seed storage facilities broken into, strange crop diseases appearing overnight. International pressure mounted. The New York Times ran a headline, "Burkina Faso faces humanitarian crisis as Traoré rejects Western aid." The French government publicly expressed deep concern for the Burkinabe people suffering under mismanagement. Ibrahim Traoré called an emergency meeting with his agricultural scientists and traditional farming elders. The gathering took place not in the presidential palace, but in a simple meeting hall in a farming village outside Ouagadougou. "Our conventional approaches are being countered," Traoré admitted to the gathered experts. "We need to think differently." An elderly woman named Fatima Zalika, known for maintaining seed diversity in her region for decades, spoke up. "The problem, Mr. President, is that we're fighting on their terms. Large fields, visible from their satellites. Centralized water systems they can easily sabotage." She opened a small cloth bag, revealing various seeds. "Our ancestors farmed here for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. They survived droughts that lasted decades. But they didn't farm the way colonial powers taught us." Over the next hours, a new strategy emerged, blending traditional knowledge with modern science. The approach was decentralized, resilient, and nearly impossible to sabotage from afar. Micro-gardens hidden under tree canopies, invisible to satellites. Ancient water harvesting techniques that collected morning dew and light rainfall. Mixed planting patterns that confused pests and maximized nutrients. Underground seed banks in every village, storing indigenous varieties. Night farming for certain crops to avoid the heat and surveillance. Dr. Amadou Diallo, Burkina Faso's leading agricultural scientist, was skeptical. "These methods can't produce at the scale we need." "They don't have to," replied Traoré. "They just need to keep us fed until our main strategy matures." "Main strategy?" asked Diallo, confused. Traoré smiled for the first time in weeks. "Come with me." That evening, Traoré took his core team to a massive underground facility converted from an old French military bunker. Inside was a sophisticated laboratory filled with hydroponic systems, growth chambers, and dozens of scientists at work. "Project Dawn," Traoré explained. "While the world watches our public efforts, our best minds have been working here, developing crop varieties that can withstand the artificial weather patterns being used against us." Dr. Aminata Touré, the lead scientist, explained, "We've been gathering data on the weather modification technology. They're creating specific patterns. We're developing plants that thrive precisely in those conditions. The more they manipulate our weather, the better our specialized crops will grow." "They think technology is their advantage," said Traoré, "but they forget that necessity is the mother of innovation, and no one innovates like people fighting for their survival." In Paris, confusion was setting in. The satellite images showed failed crops in the expected areas, but food protests weren't materializing. Intelligence reports described some hunger, but not the widespread unrest they had anticipated. "Something's not right," said Foreign Minister Dubois during a crisis meeting. "They should be desperate by now." An intelligence analyst cleared his throat. "Sir, we're detecting unusual patterns. Our sources report that while some communities are struggling, others appear to have adequate food, but we can't identify their supply source." CEO Levine slammed his fist on the table. "Increase the pressure, intensify the weather modifications, target their transportation networks to prevent food distribution." In Burkina Faso, as conditions worsened above ground, the underground resistance flourished. The combination of hidden microgardens and the specialized crops from Project Dawn was beginning to yield results. The distribution system was entirely decentralized. Small amounts of food moving through thousands of individual networks, impossible to track or disrupt. Traore himself participated in the effort, working incognito in community gardens at night, listening to people's struggles, and witnessing their determination firsthand. One evening, while helping an elderly farmer named Kofi with his hidden garden, Traore asked, "How are you managing, father?" The old man smiled, revealing teeth worn by years of hardship. "Young man, I lived through the great drought when I was a child. This is difficult, but not impossible. And this time, we know who our enemy is." "Does knowing make it easier?" Traore asked. "It makes it purposeful," replied Kofi. "My granddaughter now knows that our food is not just food. It is our freedom. That knowledge will feed us long after this crisis ends." As the 60-day deadline approached, Ibrahim Traoré prepared for the next phase. The specialized crops were nearly ready for harvest, but he needed to buy more time. He decided on a bold move, one that would either secure their future or accelerate their downfall. On day 55 of the crisis, Traoré made a surprising announcement that was broadcast internationally. He invited a delegation of international observers, including representatives from the UN, African Union, and, surprisingly, France, to assess Burkina Faso's food situation. In Paris, this was seen as a sign of desperation and impending victory. "He's finally breaking," said Levine. "He'll beg for aid, and will dictate our terms." The delegation arrived 3 days later, led by UN Food Program Director Helena Mwangi and, representing French interests, Deputy Foreign Minister Claude Bernard. They were taken on a carefully choreographed tour of Ouagadougou, shown struggling communities and failing fields. Exactly what they expected to see. Bernard could barely contain his satisfaction. During a private moment, he approached Traoré. "This stubborn experiment has gone on long enough, don't you think? France is prepared to provide immediate aid, of course, with some reasonable adjustments to your recent policies." Traoré regarded him calmly. "Before we discuss terms, I'd like to show the delegation one more thing." Buses took the international visitors to what appeared to be a barren area outside the city. As they walked over a small hill, the landscape suddenly transformed before them. Stretching as far as the eye could see were flourishing fields of crops, unlike any they had seen before. Plants with unusually thick leaves and deep root systems thrived under the artificially harsh conditions. "What you're seeing," Traoré announced to the shocked delegation, "is the future of African agriculture. Crops specifically developed to thrive in the weather patterns created by European weather modification technology." He turned directly to Bernard, whose face had drained of color. "We've been gathering data on your weather manipulation for months. Every pattern you created taught our scientists something new. The more you tried to cause drought, the more we learned about drought-resistant varieties." Dr. Traoré stepped forward with technical details. "These plants actually require the specific high-pressure systems being artificially created. Under normal weather conditions, they wouldn't perform nearly as well." Helena Mwangi from the UN looked stunned. "You're claiming that weather patterns have been deliberately manipulated to create food scarcity?" "We have proof," said Traoré, handing her a thick file. "Satellite data, weather pattern analyses, intercepted communications. The technology isn't even that secret. Weather modification has been used for decades. The only difference is the purpose." As cameras from international media captured the flourishing fields, Bernard attempted to regain composure. "These are absurd accusations. France has always been a friend to Burkina Faso." "France has been many things to Burkina Faso," Traoré interrupted, "but never a friend. Friends don't attempt to starve children because they want access to gold mines." He addressed the entire delegation. "We invited you here not to beg for help, but to witness a declaration of food sovereignty. Burkina Faso will not only feed itself, but will share these new crop varieties with every African nation facing similar pressure." The revelation created an immediate international sensation. Satellite images of the flourishing fields were broadcast worldwide, alongside the evidence of weather manipulation. Other West African nations came forward with similar experiences, creating a diplomatic crisis for France and its allies. In the weeks that followed, the artificial weather patterns mysteriously ceased. International corporations suddenly found logistical solutions to deliver previously delayed aid. The European Union offered agricultural partnerships with no political conditions. Ibrahim Traoré declined most offers, instead focusing on expanding Project Dawn and the decentralized farming initiatives. The first harvest of the specialized crops exceeded all expectations, not only averting famine but producing a surplus that was shared with neighboring countries. 6 months after the crisis began, Traoré hosted an unusual gathering at the presidential palace. The ornamental gardens had been permanently transformed into productive food landscapes. Leaders from across West Africa came to learn about Burkina Faso's agricultural revolution. In a simple ceremony, Traoré officially established the African Seed Sovereignty Bank, a collaborative institution dedicated to preserving indigenous seed varieties and developing new ones suited to Africa's changing climate. What began as an attack on our sovereignty has become the foundation of our true independence, Traoré told the gathered leaders. For centuries, control of food has been used to control nations. Today, we change that story. As the foreign dignitaries toured the gardens, Traoré slipped away to a quiet corner where an elderly woman was tending to seedlings. It was his grandmother's sister, Auntie Zalika, who had shared her traditional farming knowledge during the crisis. "You look tired, my son," she said, not looking up from her work. "The fight never ends," Traoré replied, kneeling beside her to examine the plants. "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "But it changes. Yesterday, you fought with words and policies. Today, you fight with seeds and water. These are better weapons." She handed him a small seedling. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had farmers' hands, not a soldier's." Traoré smiled, feeling the weight of the tiny plant in his palm. "She also taught me that the darkest hour comes just before dawn." "And was she right?" asked Auntie Zalika, looking at the flourishing gardens around them, at the leaders of African nations discussing food sovereignty rather than military alliances, at children learning to grow their own food in school gardens. Traoré nodded. "The dawn came," he said simply, "and it was worth waiting for." In Paris, the fallout continued. Several officials resigned. Group's own stock collapsed amid investigations and boycotts. But in the elegant offices of the Foreign Ministry, new strategies were already being discussed. Africa's resources were too valuable to abandon. They would adapt, find new pressures, new vulnerabilities. The game would continue. But in Burkina Faso, something fundamental had changed. A nation that could feed itself could not be easily controlled. And a leader who had survived an attempt to starve his people into submission would not be easily intimidated. As Ibrahim Traoré planted the seedling Auntie Zalika had given him, he knew the challenges ahead remained formidable. But for the first time since taking office, he felt the future had genuine roots growing in soil that finally and truly belonged to the people of Burkina Faso.